Dear brothers and sisters, and my dear children, today we celebrate the solemnity of the Ascension of the Lord, a day that marks the moment when Jesus, after appearing to his disciples for 40 days following his resurrection, was taken up into heaven. That's returning to the right hand of the Father. Dear friends, at the first glance, the ascension might seem like the end of Jesus' earthly story or earthly ministry. But in fact, it's a beginning. The ascension is a beginning, a transition point between Christ's physical presence on earth and then the mission of the church, his body. The church is his body, animated by the Holy Spirit. In the Gospel, Luke tells us, and then also not only in the Gospel, Luke tells us in the Gospel and also in the Acts of the Apostles. The Acts of the Apostles was written by Luke himself, that Jesus ascended in the presence of his disciples. So they stood looking up to heaven, the disciples stood looking up to heaven, amazed. And then we read in the first reading, that's in the Acts of the Apostles, two men in white suddenly appear and say, "Why do you stand here looking into heaven or into the sky?" This, my dear friends, is a gentle but a firm nudge. In other words, it's like telling, don't just look up, look out. The work begins now. The work begins now. The ascension is not Jesus abandoning us. It's Jesus entrusting us with his mission, entrusting all his disciples, the church, and he's entrusting his mission to all of us. He doesn't leave the world behind. He enters into the world in a new and powerful way through us, the church, his followers. And if we reflect on the second reading today, dear friends, St. Paul's prayer in the letter of Ephesians is deeply moving. He asks that we may receive a spirit of wisdom and revelation, and that our hearts may be enlightened. St. Paul wants us to know the hope to which we are called. And St. Paul wants us to know the richness of the inheritance we share. And then also he wants us to know the immeasurable greatness of God's power at work in us who believe. So, dear friends, this power is the same power that raised Christ from dead, the power of the Spirit, God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in glory. It is not a distant power, dear friends. It's a present and active force alive in the church, alive in each one of us. So the ascension tells us that Jesus is enthroned in heaven, but also that his Spirit lives in us. We are not just spectators. We are participants in the unfolding of God's kingdom. Going back to the gospel, dear friends, Luke's gospel ends with a beautiful scene. The disciples worshipped Jesus, and returning to Jerusalem with great joy. This is how the gospel ends. The disciples were returning to Jerusalem with great joy, continually blessing God in the temple, not with sadness because Christ left, but they returned to Jerusalem with great joy. So here we notice that they did not leave the Mount of Ascension in sorrow or loss. They left with joy. Why? Because they understood that Jesus had said to them that he would send the Holy Spirit and they would be clothed with the power from on high. They believed in the promise and they rejoiced in the mission. So, dear friends, we too are called to be people of God. For what? We are called to be people of God to worship, lifting our hearts to God in praise. And we are called to be people of joy, even in a world of sorrow and confusion. We are called to be people of witness, carrying the gospel into every corner of life. So, dear friends, dear brothers and sisters, the Ascension is a feast of hope and commission. It's a feast of hope and commission. Christ is exalted, yes, but not absent. He is present. He is now everywhere accessible. How? Through the Holy Spirit. And he continues to work his work in the world through us, through all of us, because we are the church, we are his followers, we are his disciples. So let us not be caught looking only into the skies, but instead, let's ask ourselves, where is God sending me? What is my call? What is my vocation? Let's ask God. Let's ask, who needs to hear the good news? There are so many around us need to hear the good news from us. And let's ask, how can I live my faith with joy and courage today and in the future, everywhere, at every minute, at every moment? So, dear friends, as we prepare for Pentecost next Sunday, where 12 of our children will receive confirmation, and we keep praying for them, may our hearts be open to the Holy Spirit, and may our lives echo the praise and joy of the first disciples. Let our reflection be this week, dear friends, you will be my witnesses. This is what Jesus tells us. You will be my witnesses. So may we be faithful to this mission, dear friends. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.